Consider supporting this podcast on Patreon. On this episode of the What is Asia podcast, I interviewed Jing Zhai, a Ph.D. student at the University of Texas in Austin, to talk about the lives of people living in rural communes in China from 1956 to 1983. Jing, thanks for coming on this episode of the What is Asia podcast.
Thank you for inviting me.
So just starting out with the basics here, can you just start by describing to people what your research is and the historical context around which your research is taking place?
Okay, so to be short, my research is about the everyday experience of the peasants and in the Chinese communes from the 1950s to the 1980s. And so for me, I basically started from the starting point of the collectivization and in the rural part of China, and to the end of it's like the dissolved of the not only the commune structure, but also the name of commune. And ever since then, commune is not called commune, the 公社 anymore. So it was called as township, 镇 or 镇或者乡. And I think through this topic, I'm trying to research, at least for me, there are two major goals. And the first one is the interactions between peasantry and the state. And another one is I'm really curious about the mentalities, the emotions of peasants. And I think the everyday experience is the only way, the most important way, or I can say the only way to reach to peasants' mentality and the emotions.
So you talk about the rural areas of China as being a place where a political initiative was taking place for Mao and the CCP. Can you talk a little bit about what that political initiative is? And you also talk about this term collectivization. Can you define that term for us?
So for the political initiation, I think it's like there are two things. The first sense is like before, it's like each family was a major production and unit to how to organize production in the rural China, but so centered on this production unit, and so the family life was centered on this, and back then also each family held and the kingship. And the kingship played a huge role in people's everyday life. So the first thing for the Communist Party, when it's like take control of the rural part of China, they build new structures. They are trying to break the families as the unit, at least at the beginning of the collectivization. And in that way, it's like the state replaced the kingship, and they took a lot of role, not only in the production, but also in the realm of family life or individual everyday experience. I think this is the first political initiative. And to have examples, it's like, for example, the public canteens built in the 1958. Maybe the time is not very accurate, but around 1958 to 1961. And so they just replaced each household's cooking and eating. And this is one of the examples, but there are more initiatives back then, kindergartens and the sewing groups, etc. And So another layer of political initiative, I think it's the culture. What kind of communist culture they push into it's like the rural part of China, and mm, it's like everyday life. It's not only everyday life anymore, and it's a kind of politicization meanings and implied in this everyday life. And so in this way, it's like through controlling how people eat and doing everyday life, it's a reinforced force, and also it's a symbol of the state power.
Let's go into that a little bit more.
Oh, I haven't talked about collectivization.
Yeah, go ahead.
So collectivization, it's like ever since the beginning of the early 1950s, the collectivization has already started. At the beginning, it's in the rural part, it is mainly the collectivization of agriculture, but it reached to its peak in the 1950s, the people's commune, and in the late of 1950s and early of 1960s, with the collectivization of the political collectivization and also agriculture collectivization, and start with it, and even in the realm of everyday life. And they also have a collectivization way of how to organize things. And after the peak, gradually collectivization started. It's like it's kind of loose, and the peasant has more freedom. But generally, it's like the whole structure didn't resolved, and there are still residues and the legacies of the collectivization system. And until it's like the end of the commune system in the 1983, but even after it, the same thing, it's going down, but there are still some traces of collectivizations.
I want to go a little bit more into thinking about life in the communes. Can you describe for us a little bit what it was like to be living in the commune, and thinking about it from the perspective of children? Like, what were children learning in schools, for example, or what jobs and activities were adults engaging in?
Okay, so for me, because that's a really long part of story, and I want to be a little bit simple. For me, that three are also the three major directions of my research. And I think for the how children was raised, my focus is mainly on the preschool children. And for them, it's like the changing process is mainly about it's like at the ancient China, it was really there was rarely the concept of kindergarten or any kinds of the facilities, public facilities that taking care of the preschool children, especially in Mianchi, where is my research set. And so with the it's like in the early 50s, and with the starting part of the collectivization, and gradually they started to have some institutions, and that kind of institutions only served for the people joined the team, the the mutual team. This is one of the very small unit of the collectivization, and the part the institution is called 抱娃娃族. So it's something called, it's like it's a very simple and no simple way of organizing how to raise children. And it's mainly for babies when their parents go to work, go to the field work, so they will assign someone in that team and to take care of babies. And then things shift, and at the peak of collectivization, the old way of this Baowawa still continued, but it served for the people who were in the commune, so all the people. And another thing is about they set up the kindergartens. They set up kindergarten. That is a totally novel concept back then. And for during that time, it's like all of the preschool children and who don't go to nurseries need to go to kindergarten. And this is the first part of the stories of how to raise up the preschool children, because it's like it would, all of these institutions is now to really serve for, it's like real education, but they served as a tool of women's liberation to allow the moms to go to the field. And so especially the hardship and during that time, and prevent that these institutions reach to a really high level. And in that sense, it's like it was very basic. So the kindergarten, it carries the name of the institution of kindergarten, but it was so different from now on. And there are also some implications about it's like transfer taking care of children from each family into the hand of the state, and also to let the children was it's like adapt the way of living under the collective system. And also there is that is the first time there are new professions or opportunities opened for some rural women, for example, kindergarten teachers. And the same trend continued after the ending of Great Leap Forward in the 1961, but it's like kindergarten just disappeared. And because women, they can take care of children at home, they doesn't work full-time anymore. And but during the busy season of the busy farming season, and still the it's like the nursery comes back, the one Baowawa is still there. And this is a story of the first part about how to raise children in the rural part of China. And then let's see at the second part. And the second part is basically after the Cultural Revolution. And in that part, it's like with the starting point of the one child policy, and one-child policy, and also some of the one-child policy, and also with the emerging and it's like the more emphasis on education in all levels. So there is kindergarten again, but the one disappear is nursery. And I can tell about the kindergarten part. It's like in the kindergarten, finally, the children there, it's like they need to take exams. They have the teacher graduated from high school, and they are really well trained, and the children have homework to do at home, and there is entrance exam for primary school, so they need to be prepared for that. And that totally shifted the attitude of the parents and no, of the parents, and they started to care about the children. How are they doing? And also shifted, it's like the status of children under the gaze of the state, and their roles into their roles in each families, and children was much more valued, and there are also more implications and significance for the professionalized kindergarten teachers. And also it's like there is a new, it's like the individual families took the role of how to educate their children. And the second thing is the disappearing of the nursery. And how do you think about this part? Why it disappeared?
I don't know. Why is that?
Yes.
Yeah, I can't think of a good answer right now.
I think it's like during this time, it's like since there is only one child in each family, and it's like there are, and also it's like the collectivization started to be really loose, and people just work down their own field. So taking care of these children can be totally, it's like taking care of children can be afforded by the family. That's my explanation.
Okay.
I will ask you questions. What is the
Okay.
second?
You caught me off guard. That's usually my job. Um, so notably your go ahead.
Nothing. You make me also answer about the it's like public canteen labor and other things. I don't want to, and you didn't insist. Do you want me to talk about it a little bit more? It's really long, so.
Well, why don't you tie what you're about to say in with my next question, which is thinking a little bit about, you allude to this a little bit, but um, your research notably covers a span of time that includes both the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution. And you note in the materials that you sent to me that you don't want to focus too much on those two events, but focus more on the everyday life. But still, both of these events idealized rural life as being sort of the epicenter of where collectivization and communism can grow. However, researchers, for example, the first one that comes to my mind is Klaus Muhlhahn, who writes about how there was a lot of protests, not necessarily in the form of open and active protests, but more in the form of people dragging their feet, intentionally breaking farming tools, that kinds of protests. So what kind of protest did we see toward collectivization in these communes in the rural areas based on the research that you've done?
For me, it's like I don't minimize the influence of the Great Leap Forward or the Culture Revolution. I think this it's like the most important political campaigns happened into the rural part. So first, I cannot answer your question because I think it's like there are certain kind of agent. Of course, there are agency of the peasants. They don't always agree with it's like even in the real realm of everyday life, they still find their own way to maneuver and avoid the consequences of the damage of some of the policies. But in general, I want to discuss, it's like usually we focus on conflicts, but in the realm of everyday life and in such a period, I consider it's like I focus on normalcy. And that's something, it's actually it's one of the significance can say, and something differs me from my research from others. It's like we always discuss about the relationship between the state and the peasantry, and in almost in a very complicated environment. But what happened when there are normalcy, when there are not so many conflicts? What the relationship are? And so that's why I cannot answer you. And secondly, I'm thinking it's like, because we always see this period of time as a political campaigns, and these are really important. But Gil Hershaver, in her book, she mentioned a concept about how to break the campaign time. And in everyday life is continuous, it never stops. And so in this way, it's a challenge or the construct of the campaign time of the politic. political campaign that marked the time of peasants' life. And so for me, it's like the continuity, and it's extremely important. So the everyday and the great leap forward and the culture revolution just blend in my narrative. And the third thing is about how to think time. I do think it's not only continuity can solve this problem. I found something really interesting in my research is, for example, kindergarten, there is a very clear transition point. And I just told my story from the transition from taking care of children of education. Now I can tie back. And but in the public canteen, it's suddenly it's like rise of the period of time, the public canteen that stand out. It's like it's very irregular. And in that story, how to tell that story, and my research will focus on the irregular time. And then the third one is about how to work. For that part, I just feel there are kind of, it's like if the other part is really, it's like dramatic changes. And in this part, it's very slow changes. And how to tell this story. And my research wants to tell this story. It's like to really blend every period into one, and to talk about the rituals of how to do labors, and to talk about it's like the similarity of each period, but also picked out the difference if they are really, it's like maybe huge difference, but also not so much. So in that way, it's like both of these political campaigns just blend in, and I want to deal with each different way of aspect of everyday life using different methodology, and to abandon it's like how to write a history in political history and also economical history.
I had just a few more questions before we finish up here. I want to think a little bit more about the children in everyday life. So my understanding of life in the communes, from what I've read, was that there was more of an emphasis on production and sort of living in a more practical sense than there was on education. And based on that, were children considered to become adults earlier as a result of that? So I guess another way to rephrase it was, at what point in the communes was a child considered to have become an adult, a working adult that can sort of be a productive member of the communes?
This is such a good question.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know.
It's okay.
But I can tell the reason why I don't know. It's because I didn't cover it's like the children in primary school or middle school, and only for the children in a primary school. No, in preschool. So in that sense, of course, I cannot mark the ending of childhood, and but I can mark the things I can talk about is the starting part of the childhood, because in ancient, it's like if there is no nursery, if there is no it's like kindergarten, and there is no it's like difference between it's like infant periods, and also it's like a children or a bigger child, a toddler. So there is no difference between baby and toddler. And it's like I also did some research about people before the 1949. They basically don't have the concept of where is the beginning of their toddler years and where is the ending. But by the kindergarten, oh, only the children about 3, you can go to kindergarten. And in that way, it's like childhood started, no, toddler period just started at 3.
Can you talk just a little bit about, I like to tie a lot of my podcast episodes sort of into modern times. Can you talk a little bit about the way these communes are discussed in China today, looking back on it retrospectively in history classes? And, you know, again, even though it's not the primary focus of your research, can you talk a little bit about how the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution, as it pertained to the rural areas, is discussed today in China and in primary and secondary school? And I think you particularly have a really good eye into it, obviously, because you are Chinese and you went through the education system there. What was your experience? You know, and I think often the perception that's had here in the West is that this history tends to be kind of shunned in China. It's not talked about as openly as it could be. Do you think this perception is accurate or not?
Yeah, I also agree. I just feel it's like in my experience, it's like during the it's like during my especially middle school, high school, in the history textbook, it's very standardized. Oh, about the Great Leap Forward, this all the time. What is the reason and what happened? And then it's like, what is the influence for the following era? Especially, it's like about culture revolution. And so in that sense, it's much shorter than the Wikipedia. And also there are some dark secret, and we all know it's just the Great Famine, and it's not totally, it's like, oh, the Great Famine happened, but what does that mean? And there's no other discussions. And then high school the same, but I could see that in university, it is much more better. That is, it's like there are more details. But the thing is, I don't think it's like for even for the scholars who research on this field, I do see there's some kind of restriction. I don't know especially what it is, but I think they need to eliminate at least some part of the negative opinions. And so instead of China, and also I think there are a lot of restrictions and lack of openness to discuss about this era, these 2 era. And I think everyone just know about this.
For my last question, I always like to ask my guests if someone's listening to this podcast episode and they're interested in knowing more about collectivization in China or the rural communes, or just sort of this general period of time that you discuss, would there be 1 or 2 books that you would recommend someone read?
I think one thing is like I want to recommend is like my weather's book about the village China, and in that one I feel it's very, it's like it breaks the institution and break the history of institution, and used a very new perspective to look at this period. And another one is, oh, another book I have to it's like recommend is Gilher Shatter's The Gender in Memory, and that is because I feel there are not much it's like books reflecting about women's voice, especially women's own voice. It's called Mao's Crusade, Politics and Policy Implementation in China's Great Leap Forward.
Great, Jing. Thanks for coming on this episode of the What is Asia podcast.
My pleasure, and thank you, Nikota. And I had such a good time here.
And for those who want to see more content, you can go to the What is Asia podcast YouTube channel or NakotaDefonso.com. We'll see you in the next episode.